study that came out and has been covered across various publications, including the New York Times, which is where it first came to my attention about using ChatGPT in particular to diagnose different hypothetical case presentations from patients and comparing those results with the results of doctors working on their own to diagnose these cases and doctors working alongside the AI. And there were some surprising results. So, Bridget, would you walk us through the study and what it found?
Yeah, absolutely. The researchers were from Stanford, Beth Israel, and UVA, and what they did was they recruited 50 physicians. 26 were attending physicians, 24 were residents, and they were family medical doctors, internal medical doctors, or emergency medical doctors. And the methodology was that they were randomized into two groups, and one had access to GPT-4 in addition to whatever the conventional resources are that doctors use, which I'm sure is WebMD pretty much. I don't know. That's what I use in my WebMD practice. And actually now I use GPT. And we'll never use anything but GPT after this. But and then the other group of physicians used only those conventional research resources that they were used to using, and they had them tackle 6 different vignettes, like clinical vignettes, within 60 minutes. So it was a timed test basically, and they were supposed to give their diagnostic reasoning for each of the vignettes. And then there was a third group that evaluated the LLM's performance alone using the consistent design. I'm not sure if I was clear there. There's a group of doctors using just ChatGPT and regular resources, a group of doctors using just their regular resources, and then GPT on its own, just doing what GPT does. And then they measured the outcomes for diagnostic reasoning. They scored them, the time spent per case, and then the final diagnoses, accuracy. Don't know which word, doesn't matter. And then they were graded by blinded experts. So kind of, in some ways a simple randomized control trial, but a pretty interesting one. And the results were fascinating. The LLM augmented group and the non-LLM augmented group performed pretty similarly. There was only a 2-point difference in their grading, which was not statistically significant. And that was true both along their diagnostic abilities, but also their time efficiency. And then what was the most striking finding, and the reason why everyone's talking about it and people are writing about it in the popular press, was that the LLM alone performed significantly better than both groups of physicians. And what's fascinating about that is that the physicians who had access to GPT-4 obviously had the benefit of GPT-4's thinking, but disagreed with it in many cases. And so that was just a really, really fascinating finding, and sort of surprising to me within the medical field. Maybe because I, tend to think doctors are prone to reading and changing their mind if the evidence or the data presented should cause them to change their mind. But in fact, they were more prone to overrule what the large language model was finding and disagree with it. So it's a really, really interesting study, and that it has me thinking, all kinds of curious thoughts about how to think about applying it to other disciplines. But lots of other people are talking about it. Our hard fork hosts were talking about it last week. I think Ethan Malik wrote about it. I think all the hits. And what were some of your thoughts or reactions, Jen?
Yeah. Well, first, one thing that I thought was interesting about the study, aside from the findings, which were fascinating, is that the GPT model that the researchers used is a year old. So it was 4.0 Turbo, I think. But they made the point that there's this academic lag in research and advancement of the models. So we could imagine that the results might be even more pronounced now. And a lot of my thoughts about the piece, as you mentioned, were informed by the Hard Fork podcast, which is the New York Times tech podcast hosted by Kevin Roos and Casey Newton. And they had on one of the authors of the study, who's Dr. Adam Rodman. And we're always thinking about what are the implications for legal, even as I'm listening to him describe what the implications are for doctors. And I believe he's an internist. So one of the things he talked about was how much he enjoys the cognitive challenge of being an internist and having a patient present with something that's fairly complicated that requires him to really engage his brain. And how he's sort of wrestling with, and others are wrestling with, what an LLM's outperformance of human doctors means for that part of the work. And I thought it was an interesting journey that he took us on, which is we have this professional pride in the expertise and our intelligence that we bring to it. But if the ultimate question is, how do I help patients have healthier lives? His conclusion was, I would rather use technology that's more accurate and use my abilities elsewhere. And for me, I was thinking about lawyers and how emotional some of the reactions have been across law to LLMs. And at first denial, then sort of like assertion that I add this edge to my writing that is so unique, then that's what my client wants from me. To really zooming out and asking the question of why do we exist as lawyers in the first place? And what would be the comparable coming to terms in our profession of letting go of a little bit of the cognitive work that we really enjoy and value in service of better services and quicker resolution of legal issues for our clients. So that was one of the takeaways I had. And the other piece was that what you mentioned, I think Ethan Mollick calls it algorithmic aversion. Like if you're an expert being averse to something that disagrees with you that feels like a machine that would not be as intelligent as you are as an expert.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised. I didn't. But the study doesn't cover this, but I wouldn't be surprised if um you see. I know Ethan Mollick calls it algorithmic aversion, but I bet it's similar between like sort of senior people in a field, senior doctors and residents, right? Like how often? I mean, at least I feel like that that's something I've seen over the course of my career in legal. Somebody who's seasoned and been around a long time and is sure that there's the right way to do things, um, can be dismissive of a suggestion from a, a more junior member of the profession. I mean, I say that as someone who's been on both sides of that equation. Right? I can remember I still to this day remember a specific case where I was on the faculty at Michigan and students were working on this case in a clinic, and they suggested a legal theory for emotion that I was extremely dismissive of. I was like, no, that would never work. That's not, we don't, nobody does that. And that was literally, my reaction was literally like, nobody does that. And in fact, nobody did do it. And they were also right. It was true that nobody did it. And it was also true that, like, when I stepped back and got out of my own way and read the rule, they were basically proposing that there was a rule of federal procedure that allowed us to, bring a new motion. And sure enough, they were right. I mean, maybe the rule didn't mean to allow that new motion, but the words of it did, and it worked. So I think that it's an interesting reminder about experts' um, instinct to be overconfident about your own judgment, and whether it's a technology or a junior person in your profession who has a new way of thinking about it, or a junior person in your profession who's using technology in a way, is I think a pretty good lesson for all of us in legal. As new lawyers come out of law school and are very comfortable with this technology and don't have that confidence of like, I know the right answer, they'll probably be more likely to be using the technology in ways that are more ambitious. Is my guess, right?
Yeah, it feels a little bit like a corollary to the idea of the curse of knowledge. Like once you know something so deeply, it's very hard to go back with a beginner's mind and think about how you might explain it to somebody else, do it differently. It also, to your point, in addition to not only the technology, but junior lawyers, one of the things I talk about a lot is our monodisciplinarity and the fact that all of our systems and organizations have to be owned and led by lawyers means that we miss out on insights from other disciplines. And I think that very much this dynamic unfolds where there might be a great idea coming out of finance or marketing or professional development realms, or court administration, that maybe others are dismissive because it's not from people who are trained in legal.
Yeah, or like business school, like how to, other ways to structure a legal business, which is not something that law schools teach or, law firms spend that much time studying. So there's basically one model. And it's a model that might not be the best one with what's coming with this technology. But yeah, that's
Well,
so true.
I think I might have mentioned to you that I had coffee recently with somebody in an executive MBA program. To your point about education, and then we could talk about the interview with Dr. Rodman in medical education. But this person in an EMBA program was telling me that all of her professors are using chatbots, both to serve the students when the professor's inaccessible, creating like a personalized GPT with course resources that they can ask questions of, and also in class, asking the chatbot for answers on, questions that students are asking to which there's no obvious answer. And so that sort of both modeling and substantive use of the technology, I think, is something that we don't always see in legal education, or in professional development, maybe once we enter practice. But maybe that's a good segue for hearing from you what Dr. Rodman talked about in the medical education realm, and how doctors are thinking about future doctors.
Yeah, I mean, so one thing that Dr. Rodman said in that particular interview was that there's a fierce debate going on about how to educate future medical students. And I was a little bit surprised to hear that. I have one of my kids is in medical school right now and has been pretty, has a lot to say about the memorization that feels like what is the first 2 years of medical school, which I think feels quite anachronistic to kids his age. If you're in your mid-20s, you're pretty used to using technology for all kinds of ways to get information. So and he sort of assumes he'll still have technology when he's a doctor. So having to just memorize every single thing probably isn't going to be the most important skill. And he feels like there's probably other skills that might matter more. So that was sort of interesting to me. That they're actually having a debate about it, and it's not one that I think is going on in legal. I mean, you and I think both have relationships with lots of people at law schools, but neither of us is full time engaged in legal education anymore. So I'm not sure. I don't know. Do you think that's happening in legal education?
I think for sure there are conversations happening about GPT technology and what to do
Yeah.
about it. I think maybe one of the differences, and this is an overgeneralization, there are certainly law professors who practice law full time as well. But my sense from interacting with medical faculty is that they're actually on the ground seeing patients during the day in addition to their teaching obligations. So they may be seeing this unfold in the professional landscape in ways that are supporting their immediate strategic response in the educational realm that maybe would be slower to reach law school faculty who are not practicing day to day and aren't seeing this actually infiltrate or infuse into their work as readily.
Yeah, that's a pretty important difference. But it was also interesting that he said that, in the future, he sort of felt to me like he's come to terms with the fact that it's going to change, right? The practice of medicine is just not going to be what it was when, he went to medical school and throughout most of his practice. It's not going to have the cognitive part is what I think he said. And if that's right, are people as attracted to going into medicine? Like, do you want to go into medicine if it's not, you know, having this set of cognitive skills that really can make a, life or death difference in people's, for people you treat, but rather harnessing technology to figure out how to, make sure your patients are as healthy as they can be. Maybe that's not as interesting, right? Not it's not the same, at least. So who knows if it's going to be less attractive to future potential medical students.
One thing I thought was interesting on that point that maybe makes me a little bit more optimistic in the legal realm than in the medical realm is like you, I tend to glamorize medicine as compared with law in lots of different ways. But whenever I talk with doctors or medical professionals, they talk about the difficulty of working within a highly regulated industry that's trying to squeeze efficiencies out because there's so much pressure from insurance companies, which of course legal doesn't have. And I've always used as a main reason why we don't innovate more because there is no third party driving in efficiencies. But Dr. Rodman made the point, and I wrote it down. He called it a system obsessed with efficiency, and his concern was that these advancing technologies might try to squeeze out the tiny bit of humanity left in medicine. And he talked a lot about what you and I frequently talk about, which is the elevation of human skills in a world of advancing technology and legal. I actually think there are exciting opportunities because of how inefficient we are in our profession as compared with medicine and how many more people and businesses we could serve and how the ability to elevate those human skills actually opens up a huge swath of opportunity in my mind if we could spend a little bit less time on the things that we think of as cognitively challenging to us but are maybe, depriving many more people of the ability to have strategic partnership and empathy and problem solving on their side. So I took a little bit of hope from that.
For law, for lawyers in law, yeah, I agree with you. I feel like there's so much further to go on figuring out how to do legal business, efficiently. That there's more good news than bad in a way. But I
Mhm.
actually am not sure I agreed with him about the way that technology would play out for doctors. But again, what do I know? I'm only a WebMD, not an MD. But it sort of seems to me that if you can rely on technology to do a lot of the things that might have taken you time before, maybe then you have more time to talk to your patient about what you've learned, right? And you first of all, you'll be able to learn a whole lot more in with far less time, and then you can spend your time talking to people. Which isn't to say that the computers won't eventually be able to talk to people as well. But I still think that'll be a place where, a human translating what you've learned from your AI agent nurse practitioner partner um, is going to be incredibly valuable. Maybe not as interesting again to some people who want to go into medicine, but I think it's still going to be important. But I don't know. Dr. Rodman hasn't asked me yet what I think.
Thank you for tuning in to 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. Stay informed and inspired as we continue to explore the AI-driven future of the legal profession. We'll see you next time.